We have released a bunch of new features, a standardized renderer from Rive so that it works on all platforms. Most of you prefer to learn from smaller code examples. macOS is completely uninteresting to most of you. Defold, a bit simpler to work with. The GPU skinning, 3D in Defold, our design philosophy in general, partners and investors, cross-platform game engine. So that will be our focus areas. How are you guys able to make such an awesome engine with such a small team? Thank you. Okay, so yeah, this is basically the things you like. Focus on 2D, main things, and also that's a turnkey solution. And Lua is also highly voted and appreciated. And for those that worry about all of the talk about C# and so on, don't worry, Lua will still be our main scripting language. Moving on to what you don't like. Poor 3D support. So that ties in a bit to the other questions that we want to ask during this survey. We know that we have poor 3D support, and you guys are also very well aware that that's the case. Not enough code samples. That is something that, I mean, we've identified it, and we want to try to make a focused effort of improving samples, especially since we have released a bunch of new features. And I personally don't think our documentation is really up to date and covering all of the new things that we've released during the last 12 months. We also have feedback that you don't like that it requires an internet connection to build native extensions. We are making some fairly structural changes to how the build servers work. So we are moving from AWS to Google Cloud Platform, and we are also reworking the builders themselves so that they are more self-contained and should be fairly easy for anyone with a little bit of skill to get up and running. So we're going to publish them as Docker containers in a container registry, and it should be very easy with the Docker desktop software to get the server up and running. Lack of integrations, that's also one thing that we asked a bunch of questions about, so I'll come back to that. There was 11% voting for Lua, that you like it, 8.3% don't like it. So yeah, for those who don't like it, there are alternatives. Platforms, this is interesting because we are like a cross-platform game engine, and we should of course focus our efforts on the platforms that are the most important. So this is very useful knowledge to us, and Windows is by far the most important platform. Android close behind, iOS, Switch, and for some reason web is not here. I realize that now. I will not investigate why it's not in the list now, but it should be fairly high up in this list. So I'll share updated slides with the web HTML5 platform as well. But we also see that like macOS is completely uninteresting to most of you. Consoles, fairly small. Linux is surprisingly large, actually. I was a bit surprised by the number. We're also curious to learn more about how you prefer to learn new things, because we get a lot of feedback that there's not enough video tutorials. So if everyone prefers to learn through video tutorials, maybe we should focus more effort into creating video content. I mean, Pavel is doing an amazing job with his YouTube channel, and there are some others as well. And Senva is coming in with both written tutorials and video tutorials. It is a time-consuming way of creating content. So with this question, we hope to see that it's not the top way you prefer to learn. And that's true. It's actually the least popular way of learning new things for at least our community. Most of you prefer to learn from smaller code examples and code snippets. And that is what we identified that we are missing right now for a bunch of new features. So it's good if we focus some effort on making more examples and code snippets available. So also our like full page manuals seems to be an appreciated way of learning. So that will be our focus areas to improve on the documentation and also on the examples, and probably like integrating more code snippets into the manuals as well to interleave a bunch of written text with more example code. 3D in Defold, as you know, and if you followed along on the release notes, we focused a lot on improving 3D support this last 12 months or so. Johnny has been doing a really good job of adding more features, but you know, we have a long way to go probably. And first of all, like, are you interested in 3D games in Defold? And at least a bit to my surprise, 54% of the people that responded to the survey are interested in making 3D games. I would not have guessed that it would be such a large number. Some are already creating games in 3D in Defold. But yeah, 54%, that's a significant amount of developers. And now we don't really know much about the history and background, or is this like a general trend? Is it new developers that are more interested in 3D? We have a lot of developers migrating from Unity, so they might have a different background. But anyway, a large portion of you would like to make 3D games in Defold. Single bar here in the bar chart. But on the question if Defold has everything I need to create a 3D game, where 1, I totally disagree, 5, fully agree, then most of you think that we are quite far from having all the features that are needed. It's not really a surprise. I mean, we've focused on the basic building blocks, similar to like our design philosophy in general, but we also know that it's not really good enough in many areas. So that is something we probably need to focus on going forward, without compromising on all of the other stuff, of course. Like 2D is always going to be very important to us, so we'll not shift everything over to working on 3D stuff. Don't worry. But on the question of which 3D features you are missing the most, I have a long list here. So it was like an open-ended, free-form text field. In the editor, we know that the 3D scene editing and the camera is far from optimal. It works quite well to work with 2D games, but for 3D content, it's a pain. And it's something that we will focus on during these coming months to improve on editing experience, or like navigation and moving around in a 3D scene in the editor. And the performance with large scenes, that's becoming probably an increasing concern that we have to look into. There's bound to be some very low-hanging fruit to optimize. So that's something we will investigate. GPU skinning, that's probably, I think Johnny pushed that pull requests through now, and it should be merged, I think. The improved camera component, yeah, we've done some improvements, but we need to be even better, especially for 3D games. But in general, I'd say that the camera component needs more love and needs to become even better. Yeah, obviously, like creating good looking content in 3D, it's hard. And from other engines, you might expect to have like nice lighting and PBR and all kinds of things prepared and ready for you, so that drop in some 3D model and it will just render nicely with shadows and lighting and all of that. We will probably never get as far. I think it's out of the scope of what Defold should do, but we should definitely at least try to have some baseline in like a starter project, so that you get something that looks decent at least. For physics, Jolt seems to be very popular. We have a plan to make physics engines more plug and play with, or pluggable, so that you can replace them. For collisions, you need to be able to set up colliders with a mesh, for instance, for terrain and so on. And that's something that you will likely see happen soonish, at least. Better import tools or support. So taking a complex GLTF model and importing that and having the GLTF format more as a container. That is something we want. Blender integration. I know that there is this Blender to Defold exporter by David Lannon. Seems to be working quite well. I'm not sure if we should make something that competes with that, or if we should contribute to that exporter instead. It's something to consider at least. And coming back to documentation, we probably need to, first of all, have like instructions on how to do like a decent 3D setup in Defold, and also more samples and guides to help you get started. So you can expect that in the coming months. All right. The other thing we wanted to know more about is like your thoughts on the integrations we do have with third-party SDK services and tools, and which ones you need and which ones you feel are missing. And we score quite high, actually. So Defold supports all of the third-party SDK services and tools I need to create a game efficiently. 5 is totally or fully agree. 1 totally disagree. So we are scoring fairly high. It could obviously be better. It seems like every day there's a new service popping up that someone requests integration with. But if we dig in a bit, things that you mentioned that you feel that are missing, or there were votes or people writing that they miss Fmod support, but there is actually an Fmod integration. I believe there is currently one issue on some of the platforms. It's community created extension. So one option would be that we take ownership of it and update it, but otherwise it's there on the internet source available, so more open source, so someone else could do it. Improved tile support, that's a recurring thing. I mean, there is tile tiled export to default tile maps, but you miss all of the additional metadata with object groups and so on. So maybe there is something that could be done there. Or if Defold natively could support the TMX format, that could be something quite interesting. Similar to what we did with the texture packer. So that could be something for us to look into. And for tools, I saw recently that someone shared an exporter for sprites. And we know that Rive, we want to update to the latest standardized renderer from Rive so that it works on all platforms. And so that's something we have planned. Last slide here. The Steam SDK, it was rewritten a while ago, as you know, and we've added stuff based on community feedback. So if you feel that something is missing, please create a feature request and we can usually add it quite quickly. Crazy Games as competing platform to Poki was mentioned. Kongregate and Newgrounds, I'm not sure how popular those are, but Crazy Game, I know that we have some developers releasing games there. There is an SDK, it's not official, though it's a community-created one. If you want to release games in Crazy Games, that should be possible right now with the community-created integration at least. And finally, on mobile, there's a ton of services that we don't cover currently. AppLovin exists as a community-created integration. We do have Apple Game Center. It's also a community-created integration. AdMob is an official Defold Foundation supported extension. So there are a bunch that are missing or that actually do exist, but maybe as a community-created integration instead. Usually, I would recommend that you try the community-created version. They usually work well. It doesn't have to be released by us in the Defold team. We can possibly maintain and support all of the third-party SDKs and services and tools. So sometimes you actually have to go and use something created by the community instead. It's not bad per se, just because it's made by someone in the community. All right. Finally, we had some free-form feedback, and I'm just quickly going to skim through these. We have categorized them, and we will add some comments about some of them in a future blog post. There's a lot of feedback on the editor. It can always be improved. I want to mention that we are currently very actively working on editor extensions. So you should be able to create like pop-ups at the moment, at least, where you can add a bunch of UI components and then buttons to execute some action. We're also thinking about how to add more panels into the editor. And then as a third step might be to also add gizmos and stuff in the scene editor. Right-to-left support, as our user base grows, more and more developers are requesting right-to-left support. We are looking into alternatives. We're not really happy with the choices we have, but it's something we are considering at least. There is discussions in the team about merging game objects and the UI world, and that's something we'd like to do, get rid of the GUI. It's confusing to have duplicates of a lot of things that basically do the same, but in two different ways. So we are exploring how to merge those and bring some of the UI concepts into the geo world. Also, like the fact that we have collections and game objects, and that in a .geo file you can't nest game objects, but you can in a .collection file. It's a bit of a confusion there, and could we unify those in some way? It would probably make Defold a bit simpler to work with when you have like object hierarchies. Yeah, a bunch of feedback, as you see, and we will go into more detail in a blog post. So that's it. That's a summary about the user survey. I hope the current state and some of our thoughts on it. As I said, we will share this in a blog post as well, and maybe share the slides, give you a chance to ask questions on the forum or comment on the results of the survey. I think we said that we are going to do some kind of Q&A now. So level of detail, that's definitely something that, unfortunately, Johnny, he's on vacation still, coming back on Monday, but he has it on his list of features to explore. So I can't say much about it. It's not really, unfortunately, my area of expertise. Maybe Alexey, if you have something to add about LODs.
Yes, we talked about it. We have some plans, but it's not like we don't have any ETA for now. It's deeper down in our list, I would say. For now, as I know, Yoni is working on GPU instancing, which is about to be merged. And the next thing he mentioned was related to GPU skinning. Unfortunately, I can say for Yoni, it would be better to ask him. But as I remember, this was the plan. And we talked about lots and had some ideas how it can be implemented, but it's on pre-design stage, I would say.
Yes, it will. I believe it's like if you go to the Rive runtime repository, the one we are basing our extension in the latest version, it should support the web. I know previously it was waiting for some update of the Chromium and some feature flags should be toggled. But as far as I know, it runs on the web, but not in our version yet. So we want to switch over and make, currently we have a bit of a complicated setup with the rendering. We want to simplify things and use more of a standard version of their renderer so that it's easier to update and work with. We're integrating on a fairly low level, and we want to probably skip that and simplify things so that it's easier for us to update when Rive releases new functionality. I know that Johnny was eager to look into it when he gets back, but let's see. It will probably be a few weeks before we can at least have a look. But yeah, it's happening. Yes. Yeah, we even went to Gamescom in Cologne a week ago. It's usually a great opportunity to meet with partners and investors and developers. And we had 2 jam-packed days of meetings and some quite surprising new possible partnerships. We didn't really expect Defold in those places, but it's, I can't share much now, but we do have several ongoing discussions about corporate partnerships with companies in the game space. Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, like the setup with Defold, so Defold is a foundation. It's based in Stockholm, so it's not a company. Foundation has no employees, so it owns the trademark and the source code, and anyone working with Defold and getting paid is doing that from some other company. So Refold is the company where the Defold team works from. We also have some contractors coming in doing work for the Defold Foundation and getting paid through their own companies. So the purpose of Refold is for us to be able to work with the Defold Foundation and get paid for the work we do. What we do as a side business is to help developers port games from time to time. So we've helped with some porting to consoles. That was a great way for us to also test that the whole console pipeline works, and so that we can then advise community members that are porting to console and give them hands-on help, because we've gone through the exact same process. And we've also released 2 games on Pokey just to test out and as side revenue, so to speak. But yeah, we are still like exploring that. Yeah, I mean, most of us are working full time on Defold, so we don't have much time to spend. But it's still, like you saw from the talk with Dennis, that you can actually make a bit of money on the side, and that's not to be frowned upon. And if you make a very successful game, you can make a lot of money. So for us, it's an alternative way, and also a bit of dog fooding, using the engine to actually create games. He plans on making better teal support. Yes. I mean, it's very bare bones now. So having syntax highlighting in the editor would be great. Having type annotations for all of the default APIs would also be great. Yeah, like you type annotations for the standard library and such. Of course, yes, that's something we would like to do. We just haven't had time. I mean, we wanted to release something and see if there was even some interest in teal. And it seems like some users have picked it up and started using it. So it shows that, okay, if we spend more time on it, someone will actually be happy. So yeah, it's something we will look into. How many are you right now working on Defold? So we have 6 full-time employees. 5 of them are working full-time on Defold. We're switching around. We're such a small team, so everyone jumps in where it's needed. If we do some Defold support in private to other companies, studios, and the like. So sometimes it's not actual work hands-on in the Defold engine that will benefit everyone, but most of the time, at least 5 people, I'd say, are working on things to improve Defold. And then we also have the Defold Foundation as one contractor working half-time, currently helping us do a lot of the work on H5 and also on the extend. But we'd like to be more people, but in order to scale the development team, we need more partners. So that's the purpose of going to GDC or Gamescom. We're not fortunate enough anymore to be backed by King. That was many years ago. So right now we have to actually be very careful about where we spend our money. But we're working on it. And I think it's kind of great that moving from King was a success. And we are now like an independent company or foundation working on Defold for 4 years now. We've grown the team every year. How about the roadmap for C++ C# support? Matthias is actually fairly actively working on the C# support. We recently updated to the latest .NET 9 preview, and with that, a bunch of new platforms are working. So it runs on iOS and HTML5, I think. I'm not sure if Matthias is in the chat and can correct me, but we're now basically being able to run it on most platforms. So I suppose with the full release of .NET 9, you'd be able to write C# code for all platforms. Then, just to be clear, it will be done in the same way as you do a native extension. You will not have a C# script added to a game object. It will still be a Lua script that calls into a native extension that then happens to be mainly C# code. And for C++, that's the enabler for all of this. C like C++ is what the engine is built around, and that's what we use when we generate bindings for C# or for SIG, or in the future, potentially other languages. So yeah, the goal is that you should be able to write basically all of your game logic in C++ or C# and only have like a tiny bit of Lua code, maybe to bootstrap something. But in theory, all of it should be able to be written in C++ or C#. Is it possible to update Lua to a newer version? No, we are using Lua JIT. So we recently updated Lua JIT, but it's still basically Lua 5.1 with some additional language features. It would be great if we could also use Lua JIT on the web, but currently it's standard Lua 5.1.4. So there's not really any plans to upgrade to newer versions unless Lua JIT supports it, because that's where we get the most performance. I work with Defold professionally in the US. How prevalent is the use of Defold in the States? I'd say that we have the bulk of our user base in either the US or Europe, and probably more Eastern Europe than Central or Western Europe, if that's a division you can make. But yeah, there are definitely a bunch of Defold users in the US. You mean like a shader editor? I don't know. Sounds like it's a lot of effort creating something like that. For me personally, I wonder where we should spend a lot of time. Yeah, I'm skeptical. I think we have a lot of more pressing big issues.
I hope when we have extensions for the editor, it will be possible from community side.
That's a good point. Good point, Alexey. Yeah. Vulkan ? Yes, we support it if that's what you're asking. We support it basically everywhere. Not the web, but most everywhere, I think. Is it possible to have an idea what changes besides the update available? Oh, yeah. Yeah, so we're not really happy with just showing update available and then not giving you any kind of information about the update includes. Many times it's like, so we have a way working where if you make a fix that is only in the editor and doesn't affect the runtime, anytime you merge a fix to the editor, it gets pushed as a new release. So you will get those, could potentially get those many times a day. And when we release a new version, like every 4 weeks, it's the editor and the runtime that gets updated at the same time. And we just have to figure out a good way of showing a diff or a change log could be collected from GitHub as we do when we do the release notes. But yeah, we know about it. We're a bit annoyed that we don't have something that works well. And it's also something where we are a bit uncertain about how to best go about it. And then we've just left it as is because we've always felt that, there's something more important than sharing exactly what goes into an update. And yeah, it's probably bad to think that way, but that's how we've reasoned about it at the moment, at least. The editor update that came out just recently, it was a simple one, a fix Alexey did in the editor. If you accidentally put in a space in front of or after an ID, that's probably not intentional. Could be a cause for problems and it's hard to spot. Endless imagination. Yeah, that's good. And if we can enable you to turn those dreams into a reality through editor extensions, I think that's what I can just comment on that. What we've seen with the engine extensions is that it was like a milestone in the history of Defold, because all of a sudden it's fairly easy to add an integration with a third-party service or an SDK or some platform-specific API that the engine doesn't support. So it lets us maintain a small and lean game engine while developers with small amount of effort can integrate additional things, and it gets automatically built and integrated into the engine for those that need the functionality. And we believe that editor extensions will be the same kind of pivotal point where we can unblock a lot of workflows. It's one of the things that made the Unity editor so very successful, I suppose, that it's very scriptable. And if we can get to the same or similar state, at least with Defold, I think it will be a big thing. How are you guys able to make such an awesome engine with such a small team? Thank you. Well, I guess one thing is to try and be very careful about what we work on and what we add to the engine. I know that there's been more breaking changes in the last 12 months than in the period before that. But in general, if we can keep the scope of the core of the engine down, then we can keep a fairly high velocity. But if we let the engine core grow to support all kinds of use cases and features, then inevitably things will take longer. So that's why we are also very conscious about what we put into the engine itself. And instead, the community add additional functionality through extensions. And I know that it's sometimes people complain that why do I need to add an extension for this very basic thing? And that's how we've designed the engine, that the engine core should be small, and for additional features, you add an extension. Yeah, we have to keep it that way as much as we can, at least. Would it be a good idea to have some kind of in-GUI integration to the editor? Bit of a crazy idea. I would suggest that we look at what you guys can do with editor extensions that we are currently adding to the editor. For the runtime, there is the in-GUI extension, and that's something that more and more developers are using to create debug UIs in-game and so on. What are the plans for moving GUI to game objects? We know that we want to do it. There are many things that are unique with the GUI files and the GUI components. So it's a recurring discussion we have within the team. There is a design document and some thoughts, but we haven't really taken any concrete steps yet. We have just identified that, okay, this has to change, but how should we do it? And can we do it gradually somehow? How can we transfer layouting and stencils and a bunch of things that are unique to the UI into the game object world? We don't know yet exactly how, but we want to do it. Jeff, you can definitely move forward with the UI for now. It's not going to happen soon. More likely next year, I'd say. Are there any numbers indicating developer usage in VS Code versus native editor? Is VS Code usage frowned upon? No, I think as a developer, you should use the tools that you are most comfortable with. And if that's VS Code, then it's great. And I haven't really tried it much, but it looks like the default integration is quite powerful. So if that's good for you, then keep using it. And then also I know that some developers are really happy with, or don't want to, have this workflow of switching between two tools. And they are quite happy with writing code using the native code editor or built-in code editor. There's room for improvement, but I think it's working quite well. And with the integrated language server, it's better as well. So use whatever is good for you. If you have more questions, you know where to reach us. We're always monitoring Discord and the forum. Please keep asking questions. Thank you so much, Pavel, first of all, for organizing this. This has by far been the most successful and best made with Defold game jam ever. I really appreciate what you've done for the community with this game jam and everything else as well. So thank you for doing this with the talks and everything. It's great. Thank you. Bye-bye.